Hey, welcome back. Just got done roasting a bunch of little samples for this little experiment I wanted to do. And I will put that at the end of this video, okay? And it was basically, does it cool better? That was the experiment. But as I was doing the experiment for myself, I just wanted to see if it was worth doing. I was like, well, why don't I just share everything I kind of know about samples if you're just getting started with samples at home. Okay, couple things. So I'll share some questions that I got, and then maybe even some tips, okay? So why samples? Why do we even use sampling in coffee roasting? Well, one, to make a buying decision, like, is it worth it? Is it worth for me to spend $7 a pound or whatever it is, you know, to make buying decisions? Two, to experiment. You know, maybe you want to just see what this tastes like at this roast level or this roast level, or let's put these two together, or let's roast this, blend them together and see what that tastes like, right? So to experiment. Another way is why we use samples is if you don't roast and you just want to taste, you just want to cup and you want to see the difference between, like, say, a washed or a natural sample, or like anaerobic, macerated, carbonic, lactic acid, those types of things, and just see what it tastes like, you know, learning. Even if you are a roaster, maybe you get samples to stay on top of your cupping skills, you know, cup them against what you have in your own inventory. That's a good idea too. I used to do that a lot. I still do it. Every time I go into a new city or into a new cafe, I'll buy a bag of their coffee and try to find something comparable to mine, just to check myself, you know, and cup it against my own coffee. Another way we use it is to test blends, test blend ideas, quality control. So maybe you've had a blend and you need to replace a green in your blend, and so you need to test it, but you don't want to run the whole production and everything. So run a little test, a little sample. Maybe it's 50 gram, 100 gram, or whatever it may be, or it's probably going to be less than that. Blend it with your existing green and see if that replacement is actually a good replacement, and then you can buy it, right? Another one, obviously, less coffee waste. So before I even knew about sampling, because I totally didn't know about sampling when I first got into roasting. I don't know why. Maybe the literature just escaped me, or it's a lot of information when you first start roasting. So I didn't know about sampling when I first started roasting for a long time. And so I would get in a new green. I would read online what it was supposed to taste like, and then with no experience or standard or guide to go off of, I just went and roasted the thing. So I would inevitably go through a lot more production roasts. I didn't even know it was called a production roast at the time, to get to where, like, oh yeah, I think I can sell this coffee, or this coffee tastes good now, you know. So less coffee waste. Another reason why is in a more professional sense, it's to assess green quality. What's the quality of the green? You know, when you receive green samples from your supplier or from your producer, you can actually see, like, is there insect damage? Are there defects? Or what color does it even look like? We need to assess the color of when you start at nothing, raw, no heat applied. I want to see what this green actually is, what shade it is, because if I'm going to take it to green to yellow, and then I'm going to roast it beyond that, I need to know where I'm starting, because not all green look the same. You know, natural processed green, they look a little bit more yellow than a wash processed green, right? Or even decaf, their starting point looks a lot darker than a lot of other coffees, so we just need to know where we're starting from. Okay, so that's why we sample. So how do we get these samples? Well, there's two general ways. One, you can get it from the supplier, the producer, or the farm, or whatever, if they have a roaster there and they know how to roast their coffee. Typically, if I don't have the time here, or for whatever reason I can't roast my own samples here, I would just get roasted samples from Hasea, my local green coffee source. And I would trust that they would just roast it to a typical roaster, a typical sample roast, which in the industry is a little underdeveloped, and it's just to assess and judge the green and say, okay, I could see what the flavors are here, but maybe if I take a little bit further, I can see this becoming a medium. And you only know that with experience. But you can have a conversation with your supplier and be like, hey, Jared over at Hesea, could you let me know how you roasted this sample so that I just know where you're coming from when you send me this sample? If I don't have, if I'm not going to do my own, I just need to know where you're starting off from, and just get as much data as you can acquire and then work that into how you're going to do your own production roast if you decide to buy it, okay? Another way that we get our samples is we roast them ourselves, obviously. So typically you can request samples of raw coffee from your supplier or your producer farm in like 50 gram, 100 gram, 250 gram, 300 gram. Those are the quantity or the numbers that I'm seeing requested in terms of samples. Now, you can probably expect that the more that you request, maybe the more that you're gonna have to pay for shipping. But typically suppliers don't charge you anything for these. And, be decent and do them a solid and request samples that you already think you're gonna buy. That way you're not kind of like wasting their time. Just be decent about it, about the whole process. Be a human being about requesting samples. It's not cheap to send stuff through the mail these days. Okay, so a couple things, pros and cons with getting roasted samples from a supplier. Okay, they're possibly going to be more accurate. I know that Jared has the Ikawa Pro. Now, it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be the best every single time. It just means that, okay, he has the proper equipment. And if you don't know, don't assume, just ask. Coffee people are so willing to tell you what they have. They're willing to help you. Every coffee person I've ever met, any roaster who's ever taken time roasting, they're super nice, super humble, and just always willing to help. Ask detailed questions, just get the gist on what you're attempting to buy, okay? If you do request roasted samples, they have to ship it to you, right? So maybe it's not going to be as fresh as you'd like it. Now, typically, industry standard says cup within 3 days of the roast in order to adequately, assess these green. And if you're in a professional sense, then that's probably the best way to go, is to just make sure these samples get to you on time. But if you roast them yourselves, you don't have to deal with that, right? So another thing, if they are roasting, ask the question, do the whole thing. If they're roasting these samples for you, just ask the question, hey, what did you roast this to? What was the finishing temp? Now, it's not going to be totally like a parallel one-to-one comparison to, say, a production roast. It's going to be possibly a little hotter in terms of like finishing temp. They're not one-to-one. Remember, coffee is not an ultimate science. It's not always roasted by the numbers, paint by numbers sort of thing. There's nuance and stuff in there. But you can just ask and get the detailed information and just consider it when you're making your decisions. It could be a little underdeveloped, it could be a little overdeveloped. I mean, fluid bed roasters are not the same as what you would maybe be used to with a drum roaster. That's super common, right? So just things to consider. Now, when you roast your own, you potentially have full control over your samples. Now, what does that mean? I put a little asterisk over the word control. With me, I have the Ikawa Pro Home. It's not here in the back of me right now because I just used it. But I can only change a couple things. But it works for me in that I can select a typical standard washed sample roast profile, which is just like lightly roasted, low development, right? So as light as I can, as light as possible. I don't want any roast to come into my sample roast. Because I want to just assess the green and the terroir and the process, and I want to taste that. And as much as possible, I don't want to introduce any roasty flavors into my sample roast, because I don't really need to taste that right now. I need to taste the terroir and the variety. Okay? Variety. I think I can use that interchangeably. And that works for me. And I just keep that standard. Among any washed coffee I get, or a similar process, or any natural process I get, I have one standard roast for that, which is maybe just a little bit lighter and maybe less application of heat. I think that's what the Ikawa does. I know that's what the Ikawa does. So if I have that standard approach, and I glean that from Mill City Roasters, they do that same thing with their 500 gram sample roaster. They're just like, this is the sample roast profile. And then from there we can tweak. We can go, okay, yeah, from the cupping table, we can assess that we need to develop this more, stretch this out, or cut this off, or whatever it may be. But it's like a control. So we don't really need to change so many different things when we're roasting samples. Because why? They're samples. What's the goal? We just need to taste the terroir, the varietal, if we want to buy this coffee or not, okay? Typically, if that's our goal, right? You adjust your methods to fit your goals. If you don't have any goals, if you don't know where you're going, then you got to do that first. Another thing, like I said, when you roast your own, they're super fresh. Washed, processed samples, you take a day, do it in the morning, next day, you cup it. Natural processed coffees take 2 days, 48 hours. Do it in the morning, 2 days later in the morning, cup it. Just keep it like that. Keep it simple. Create a little loose system for yourself. I don't think you ever want to be cupping at the end of your day. I don't imagine that would be the best way of doing things, but do what works for you. Another thing, if you're doing them yourself, again, you have full control. So what if you mess up? What if you know for sure, my roasted sample is just smoky. It smells smoky. That's weird. That's off. That smells off to me. So let me do another one. Let me get another sample of green and do another one. So if you requested 100 gram sample, you can at least run 2 tests, right? 2 sample tests if you had an Ikawa or something that could sort of automate the roasting process for you. And that's why I'm really behind getting a sample roaster if you are going to roast your own samples. If not, just request samples. I think that's way easier. I know that kind of takes away from the hands-on vibe and all that stuff, but I don't know. Looking back now, if I was not going to go into the business of coffee, I don't know. I can't say that. I was going to say maybe I wouldn't even get any Ikawa. But I know I like it. If you have the money, whatever, do what you want. So here's the scenario. Okay, so sample to buy. Here's our goal. We set our goal. We have a sample to buy. We're going to get a sample to buy some new single origin, right? So it'd be different if I was maybe going to sample to buy for a blend or something like that. But let's say it's for a new single origin. I choose my standard roast profile for a washed coffee, low development, lightly roasted, light as possible, basically. And then we're going to do the proper thing of roasting it, cooling it. Now, this brings us to the experiment that I just ran in the garage over with the production roaster. We got the Ikawa set up here. All right. Okay, hey, welcome back. We are out here with the Ikawa here, and we're right next to the production roaster. You can see that over kind of there, not really, there, okay. So we're out here. The cooling phase when you roast here in the Ikawa is not that great. They always feel a little too warm to me. I wouldn't drop these beans if I felt that warmth through the cup, through here, or even here. I'll put them in here or something. I wouldn't feel comfortable dropping because I would feel like they're not cooled fast enough. And if your coffee's not cooling fast enough, or if it's still warm like that, then it's still roasting. So it's maybe over developing from what you thought you were dropping your coffee, because the coffee doesn't stop roasting when you just drop the coffee, right? So what we're going to do is run a little experiment, and I find, in theory, I think this is just going to be way better. After I am done roasting my samples here, I'm going to drop them in the cooling tray of my production roaster right here, cool them down real good, and then see if that makes a difference in the cupping table, okay? And we even have this, because I want to know what the actual temperature, ambient temperature is, I guess, when I drop the beans from here versus here and putting them in here. It'd be just a fun experiment and see if on the cupping table this setup outside is going to be worth my time. Okay, I got my sample cards. So let's fill these out. Let's do 50 grams. Okay, cool. All right, all the samples are set. Drop them in. Okay, second reading is actually 114, 116, hovering around there. So we'll call this not cooled. So we've got extra cool and not cooled. And we'll test these later. And it's supposed to handle all that stuff. Maybe the Pro version is better at cooling, but I don't believe, without proof right now, that it's cooling the coffee properly, because it feels quite warm when I drop it into these little sample cups that I have here. So now I'm going to answer some questions and then we'll get into some tips. So how many different samples should you get? You should get as many as your setup can accommodate. So I have like 12 cupping bowls, and I think I won't ever get I think I'm comfortable cupping as many as 5 different coffees with some buffer. Yeah, 5 different coffees. So as many as your setup can accommodate, because what you don't want is to be running the clock, pouring the water, you run out of water, you run out of bowls, whatever it may be, now you're off on the timing. Now your whole experiment is kind of a wash, right? So get as many as your setup can accommodate, and as many as you think you're seriously thinking about buying. You know, be decent, don't waste your suppliers' time and money. Or ask them questions, you know? So if you're going in blind, you're like, I heard about sampling, but like what? Ask your supplier, okay? And come in with some goals, you know? Come in with a little vision, like, I'm trying to do this. Can you help me with this, okay? Other questions. How do you decide which coffee to buy if they all taste good? Again, come in with the goals, you know? Okay, with this green, I want to make a omni roast. With this green, I want to sell a super light roasted, unique, single origin and market it that way. So if you have your goals on the board, that should direct you, you know, in terms of helping you decide what to do. And if you have somebody to soundboard off of, bounce ideas off of, with the goal in mind, right? The goal should guide you. It shouldn't be an end-all be-all, but it should certainly direct your attention and direct the type of questions that you bring up to the people who are in the industry and could help you out. Do you consider price? Yeah, so when we cup coffees or when we buy coffees and sample coffees, in the industry they do it blind. But what if you're maybe somebody like me and I'm like, I'm looking for a replacement. Again, considering goals with the coffee. What are we doing? What's the main goal here? Considering where you want to go with it, you know, most of the time I'm looking at coffees because I'm a very small roaster, and I don't have a lot of money at my disposal. I don't make profit. That is even worth mentioning. With coffee, it's purely love. It's purely passion, but I need to cover my costs, right? And I need to make sure I'm not really spending too much, but I'm not spending so little that I'm not proud of what I'm doing. So typically what I'm doing is I'm landing in between a price point of like $6 to $7 a pound. That's kind of like where I land. And I'm buying 20 kilos at a time. Okay. Okay. At the same time, when I'm considering price, I'm also balancing flavor, goals again, that's coming back again. The profile, the use. Is this a blend? Is this like I say, is this a blend? Is this an omni roast? I can be pretty flexible with my filter in terms of like, is this good enough or not? Or is this supposed to be super unique? And maybe I'm going to sell it at a little bit higher premium or whatever it may be, to cover my costs. Yeah, goals. Do you get an idea of how to roast it from the Ikawa? How to roast? Okay. No, I don't get an idea of how to roast. When I take coffee from the Ikawa, they have their little roast curve and everything. It's totally different from what I'm used to with the whole like downward sloping ROR look kind of thing. So I don't have any real idea of how to cup it. I mean, how to roast it from the Ikawa. What I do have is past experience, past roasts that I have documented in my RoastPath and in my roast notebook, right? Talked about that in the other video, I think. And then from the cupping table, I have that information after I've cupped it, and then I have the plain information, the details from the supplier about the green itself. Oh, it's 1,500 meters elevation, it's wash process, it's, that's basically it, right? It has this moisture level, if that's pertinent, it's this size bean, maybe it's a large bean versus like a pea berry or something. So the actual like green information. So I have all that information. The Ikawa, it just gives me a consistent sample roast where it's just like, I don't have to worry about that, me messing up the sample roast, like me manipulating anything, because I used to do samples in my production roaster. I used to roast 100 grams in my 1 kilo capacity roaster. That was very difficult, very inconsistent. Tip the coffee hardcore. Not fun also, because it's very wonky, unreliable. Probes aren't reading correctly, so it's like, it's kind of a wash. How many times does it take for you to roast, to get it right on the production roaster? For me, maybe about 3 times to feel comfortable selling it. That's typically the number I'm kind of reaching. I'm like, I do it once, okay, we find out. We make some changes on the second one. I make yes or no decisions there. I verify those yes or no decisions on the third roast. Typically, that's what happens. And like for me, 3 is where I usually land. Now, if I'm still having trouble, maybe 5 times, just to check, double check. Okay, that's it. Tips. Let's get into tips. It's good to have a comparison on the table of the cupping table to provide like a control. So if we're doing this sample, and we're testing them, right? Let's bring in one of our own coffees that's similar to these. So if these are washed, I'll bring in a similar origin of mine, washed, and maybe even similar origin if I have it. Just something similar, as close as possible as I can get it, to provide a control, to give me something to bounce off of. Otherwise, I'm sort of just like judging these. I don't have anything to judge it against. It helps. It helps me anyway. Another tip, like I just said, cup similar coffees next to each other, naturals to naturals, washes to washes, if you can. If you can. Similar flavors. I usually cup samples in the morning. Talked about that. Haven't had anything to eat yet to affect the way I'm cupping. This is more like cupping tips, but still applies. 24 hours for washed, 48 hours for naturals. What else? That's it. Okay. Anyway, hope that was helpful. informative. In the next video, we're going to cut these. We're going to see if that extra cool down was actually effective and worth it versus the not cool down one. Because when they be dropping, it was like 115 jumping around on my laser thermal instrument there. 113, 114, 115, 116. I'm just moving the laser around, something like that. And then dropping them into the cooling tray of my production roaster and seeing if that helps. We'll see. Catch us on the next one. See ya. Bye.